Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Hi, Inez. Good afternoon, and welcome to Read650's Stonewall Plus 50, True Stories of Power, Pride, and Progress. I'm Read650 founder and editor, Edward McCann, and today's show celebrates the anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising, which took place here in New York City 50 years ago this month. Read650 takes its name from the maximum word count of the true story submissions that we present on our stage, 650 words, which translates to a 5-minute spoken word performance. This special edition of Read650 is streaming live from City Winery in downtown Manhattan, and I thank everyone here in the house for coming out to support good writing and the spoken word. I also want to thank all the people beyond the theater who are watching our 4-camera live stream. In addition to our local viewers here in the New York tri-state area, we are joined today by viewers in Los Angeles, San Jose, Pasadena, Santa Fe, Denver, Chicago, Atlanta, Orlando, Raleigh, and Washington, D.C. Thank you. We also greet our friends and relations in Ireland, England, Switzerland, Japan, and at least one faithful viewer off Australia's southeast coast in Tasmania, where it is about 6 a.m. Monday. And as many of you know, I am talking about my cousin Janice, so let's say hello to cousin Jan in Tasmania. And welcome all the live stream viewers around the country and around the world. I am so glad that you're all here. And on behalf of my partner and executive producer, Richard Kolath, and Read650's senior editor, Stephen Lewis, who's here in the house, and City Winery founder and CEO, Michael Dorff, we all thank you for supporting good writing, these good writers, and the spoken word. 50 years ago in the United States, to be homosexual was to be considered both mentally ill and a criminal. And to simply exist and to be visible was to risk discrimination and arrest. Less than 1 mile from here in Greenwich Village on June 28, 1969, a New York City police vice squad raided the Stonewall Inn, which was a common practice of harassment, humiliation, and arrest of so-called deviants and freaks. But something changed in those sweltering early morning hours when a woman who was being loaded onto a paddy wagon cried out to a crowd of onlookers, "Why don't you guys do something?" And that's when the shouting began, and the first pennies were thrown, and then the next bottles were thrown, and the vastly outnumbered police had to take shelter and call for backup from inside the bar they had just raided. The newspapers called it a riot because the straight world lacked the language to describe what had happened, which was, finally, resistance. And like so many revolutions, the Stonewall Uprising began suddenly, spontaneously, in a tiny place few people had ever heard of. It was both a culmination and a beginning, and the reverberation from those 5 days of outrage and resistance have echoed through American history to this day, and they echo through the essays, the personal stories that you're about to hear from our cast of both gay and straight writers. Each of the writers whose work we present to you this afternoon have risen to the challenge of compressing and distilling their experiences into a tight, taut frame of just 650 words. And I am proud to present their work to you. And so let's get to it. We're going to begin Act 1 with Jane Marks. And Jane Marks has been self-employed in New York City as a tourist guide for nearly 40 years. Along the way, she's also been a stand-up comic, a storyteller, and a social science editor at Random House. She has written and performed in 2 solo plays, and conscious that she is a human dynamo dependent upon energy for her existence, Jane says she wishes to die from exhausting her potential. She opens today's show with Original Thinkers. Please give a warm welcome to Jane Marks.
Say it aloud. That's how I feel. Immediately, you're declaring yourself a sentient being, entitled to your emotions, no matter what they be. But if you're gay, and it's the 1960s, you've got your work cut out. There's homophobic legislation everywhere, forcing you in the closet 1 minute, deciding to step out the next. Having a drink at a bar with others of your ilk, watching the police raid the place. Shaking off your cowering position, you rise up, fists clenched at last. You defend yourself inside the Stonewall Inn, June 28th, 1969. Yet, I'm tone deaf then, obsessed with getting troops out of Vietnam. My brother's bailiwick is gay liberation. He's in Cambridge, Massachusetts, getting his master's in city planning at the Harvard School of Design. Gifted with a $5,000 Housing and Urban Development Fellowship, my father is proud, patting him on the shoulder, giving him a hug, a far cry from those chastising days when he berated him for not liking baseball. Dragging him off Saturday mornings to be a catcher in a Little League team, distaste written all over my brother's face. My father, irate when he drops the ball, resolving he'll make a man out of him yet. After all, his boy's the son of a left fielder. But our father's plan gets aborted. My brother writes a note. I hate baseball. I don't want to play it ever again. Leaves it in my mother's night table drawer. That's that. He's doing what he likes, collecting stamps, drawing maps of imaginary cities, writing aerograms to a Finnish and a French pen pal. The year before Stonewall, in 1968, he tells me he's gay, on the down low, confidentially. I'm 24, he's 21, saying, don't tell Mother and Dad, they'll both be ashamed. Dad will blame Mother for making me soft. Mother will get scared. I'm listening, seeing this as all bad for me. I already classified myself as weird, waiting for a sign when I know myself, perpetually chasing my tail, according to my dad. It's impossible for me to think before I speak. I've got nothing to ruminate upon. Experiencing 2 eye operations at the age of 5, getting molested at 7, I'm half shut down. But grateful my brother's my friend. He appears so mainstream. Until then, I ask, does your girlfriend Christine know? He says, she has to. I tell her I dream of penises, not her. Which is why he may have been inside the Stonewall Inn at some time in his life. He's in Manhattan a lot, staying at my place. I know the drill. The mine shaft, Rawhide, St. Mark's Baths. Once, after perusing the ramble, he informs me nonchalantly that a mugger there took his watch, the one I give him for college graduation. I'm furious. I say, next time, whack off in the shower. The worst that can happen, you'll slip. With him, I'm myself. I even ask, do you think I'm crazy? No, he assures me. You're an original thinker. Trust yourself. Carry an imaginary machete. Cut down what's in your way. Be on your own path. And just like that, I'm back on track. We two, in our Hansel and Gretel bond, each parenting the other, reducing each other's stress. All of this coming to an end with a single diagnosis, May 1987. I'm with him inside his doctor's office. I see black. He loses weight, apprising our parents, Chagas, schistosomiasis, myocarditis, the diseases I get in the Peace Corps in Brazil are back. He dies March 11th, 1989. His body atop his bed inside the Harvard Infirmary, blind, 100 pounds on a 6-foot frame. Friends, students come by and say their farewell. His last words etched inside my head. For the last 15 years, I've not been depressed, not once.
David Masello began his career as a nonfiction book editor at Simon & Schuster, and he's held senior editor positions at Travel and Leisure, Art and Antiques, and Town and Country. He's currently executive editor of Milieu, a magazine about design and architecture. A widely published essayist and poet, his pieces have appeared in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Best American Essays, and elsewhere, and his plays have been performed by the Manhattan Repertory Theater, National Arts Club, and Jewish Women's Theater of Los Angeles, where he's artist in residence. The author of 2 books about art and architecture, he teaches writing courses at Sarah Lawrence College and contributes to today's show an essay entitled Pass-Through. Please say hello to David Masello.
From the kitchen counter, I see my friend framed by the pass-through that links me to the living dining room. 20-plus years in the apartment, I've had an inside view of my life through this rectangular cutout. Labor Day weekend, and I've assembled all the ingredients I need to complete a scenario. Sunday, September, hint of dusk, salt of sweat from our walk together over Brooklyn Bridge. Friends, we're so comfortable with that identity that he reads on the sofa beneath a funnel of lamplight, while I unwrap and stir, mix and marinate. Just days earlier, on the deck of the rental upstate I'd had for the summer, that last afternoon before packing up, retracing the Taconic, its narrow shoulders dotting with deer I fear will leap, I intoned my annual wish that the coming season would include this very scene with him, or, since I must, someone. And there he is, framed within the recess like a painting. But no composition made of living parts holds. As suddenly as I'd spotted flashes of reddened leaves atop the trees the drive back, signaling seasonal change, I've had a change of feelings for him, which I cannot admit. If stated, the words would undo this, he'd vanish from my frame. Of the 7 Manhattan apartments I've occupied, this one has the best view, inside the windows and outside. Through my pass-through, I've witnessed many scenes I've composed, an ever-changing, curated art gallery. Handing my former partner's mother a martini through the opening in celebration of her solo art show. 3 pimento-stuffed olives set at the glass bottom like an ellipsis, suggesting continuing on. The turkeys I've carved, pies I've segmented, rosés I've uncorked as I pass through to those gathered in the room beyond plates. I see my now late uncle at Easter, frail, excusing himself to lie down, my then boyfriend handing him water I handed through that pass-through. The interior fireworks, one 4th of July when a drunken acquaintance grabbed the youngest guest and kissed him so hard he drew blood. The guest dabbing his lip in astonishment, my handing him a damp cloth through the opening, he handing it back for rinsing. And Halloween, when a handsome, self-proclaimed witch came to dinner, the pentagram wrist tattoo revealed as he smoothed the tablecloth. It could never have worked between us. He'd never even heard of Bewitched. I host an annual Christmas Eve dinner, the Stray Gays, many of us professing to seek people exactly like each other, but few acting on each other. I'm telling you, that's the mystery of gay middle-aged men. We want what and who is exactly before us without taking it. Maybe it's because we recognize friends as family, especially at our age. And why risk losing a friend for something as hazardous as romance? I've yet to meet a gay man who's fallen for someone who was his friend first. I'm pioneer stock. As for the framed scene of him, never before have my feelings for a friend shifted this way, and falling in love with a friend taboo as incest. Look, I call to him at the pass-through, wanting him to see what's happening outside my windows. The swath of Midtown is ablaze with the changing September light, its sharpness bringing into relief a barge sliding by on the river, a dog barking from its deck, Halifax emblazoned in monumental font along the hull. He, however, won't remain in that light. You love the things the other loves. Their sources of happiness become yours. Among his, monumental sculpture. An aluminum beam we saw together in a sculpture park meadow is suddenly for me beautiful as Bernini. Upon discerning, later, what I feel, he dismisses me, us. He prefers artworks abstract, I realistic. But as that Labor Day meal progresses, he lowers the novel to look at me and I to him, opposite sides of the pass-through. Though at the table soon, we will convene, not so unlike a couple.
Anne Levin is the former national news editor at the Associated Press, where she worked for 20 years. She's also written for USA Today, AARP, The Forward, and she has served as an editor for the UN Population Fund and Columbia University. She lives here in New York City, where she's currently at work on a memoir, and she joins us this afternoon to present Lesbian Nation. Please welcome Anne Levin.
Jill Johnston was the first woman I ever had a crush on. She wrote for the Village Voice, and I read her columns religiously. They were lyrical and profane, written in stream of consciousness style. She used minimal punctuation, spelled America lowercase and with a K, and had a knack for saying outrageous things. Like, all women are lesbians except those who don't know it. And until all women are lesbians, there will be no true political revolution. And lesbian is a label invented to throw at any woman who dares to be a man's equal. In 1973, Jill came to Smith College to talk about her new book, Lesbian Nation. She was 44. I was 19, a sophomore majoring in English. The year before, I'd read Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, which shattered everything I thought I knew about English literature. It turned me into a militant feminist and made me understand that Norman Mailer, who was then the darling of the literary establishment, was creepy and possibly a psychopath. I didn't know who I was or what I wanted out of life, but I knew that I had no interest in Amherst College mixers where girls drank until they blacked out and woke up in strange beds next to a pile of coats. Jill arrived on our campus, on our well-behaved campus, like an Amazon warrior, surrounded by her all-female entourage. Tall and rangy, with shaggy hair to her shoulders and small, crooked teeth, she had the confidence of a jock, like Billie Jean and Martina, and the goofy charm of a clown. Just by looking at her, you could tell how comfortable she felt in her body. And if you didn't like the way she looked, well, too bad. At the end of her talk, I stuck around for an autograph. And when it was time for her to go, she gave me a jaunty wave and said in a slightly snarky voice, "See ya around the campus." I swooned. Fast forward 44 years, and despite my crush on Jill, I've been married for 30 years to a man. I'm downtown at a play about a notorious debate in 1971 at Town Hall in New York City. The topic, women's liberation. The moderator, Norman Mailer. On the panel, Jill Johnston. As the actors recite their parts, film footage of the event starts to play on a screen. And there's Jill reciting her poetry at the podium. Two women barge on stage, and all three tumble to the floor and start to make out. After the play, I rushed home to see if I could find my copy of Lesbian Nation. It was long gone, left behind in a move. I emailed a woman down the hall, a well-known feminist back in the day. She said her copy was missing too. When I went online to buy it, I discovered it was out of print. Even the Strand didn't have it. Next, I emailed the New York Public Library, but they kept their copy off-site. Finally, I realized there was only one place to find it, the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn. And so, on a blustery day in early spring, I took the F train out to Park Slope. And sure enough, there it was, sitting on a shelf in a yellowing cover, with a picture of Jill in an embroidered denim jacket and a metal necklace the size of a bicycle gear. As I sat down and flipped through the pages, I realized that pretty much everything she'd said about the patriarchy was still true. At the Women's March in 2017, aging feminists like me with gray hair and no makeup carried signs that said, "I can't believe we still have to protest this crap." Long ago, Jill argued that who you sleep with is a political decision. I had no problem with that. I just failed at being a lesbian.
Jose Peña was born in Montevideo, Uruguay, and graduated from the schools of medicine and science in Uruguay with a PhD in neuroscience. He's now a tenured professor of neuroscience at Albert Einstein College of Medicine in the Bronx. Jose lives in New York City and has a small house in the Massachusetts Berkshires where he has positioned perches on nearby trees for owls, one of his favorite subjects of study. Jose traveled here today to present a bird's eye view. Please join me in welcoming Jose Peña.
Mom walked in my bedroom and sat on my bed in our home in Montevideo. She started caressing my hair. Jose, you sometimes behave as something you are not. I was around the age of 10, yet knew what she meant. I had already been called sissy, maricón, in school and sensed dislike on people's faces when I let my spontaneous self show. Years later, she cried. When I told her the reason I was out the previous night was because I had stayed at the hospital with a friend dying of AIDS. She was crying about me, not about my friend, upset by the implicit indication that I was gay. Sadly, her early Alzheimer's did not allow us to revisit these memories as adults. When I was in my 20s, Dad called me into his office the day after all the gay bars in Montevideo were raided. Every man in every one of those places had been arrested and taken to the police station for questioning on a criminal case involving a relative of the country's president. Jose, how did you end up in jail last night? My father asked. Be careful who you go out with. I know good psychiatrists I can put you in touch with if needed. He was proud, however, the day I came down with gonorrhea. Oh, satisfaction in his face while injecting me with penicillin and joking about my presumed adventures with female prostitutes made this episode a bonding experience in our father-son relationship. Not only do my dad and I look still alike and carry the same first, middle, and last names, I decided to become a doctor too. But midway into medical school training, I realized I'd be a better scientist than a doctor. It was easier for me to face reality when dealing with a guinea pig than a person. In my workplaces, however, I kept blushing when colleagues lamented, I haven't had a puto minute to run a puto experiment. Puto, faggot, is not an uncommon expression in my native country of Uruguay. That blushing went away when a few years later, I arrived in California as a postdoctoral fellow and saw guys holding hands on the street. I went back home then, but nothing was the same after having experienced comfort with my identity and the marvels of the United States academic environments. And here I am now, studying the brains of barn owls. People ask me, why that choice? The simplest answer is that I'm fascinated by brains that are not close to ours, yet reveal universal laws of nature, just as astrophysicists are by planets and stars in other galaxies. Being a gay neuroscientist is often a rather lonely endeavor. It's hard to find role models among colleagues. I often wish my male colleagues stopped pushing me to conform to masculine standards of leadership and success, and confusing kindness with being bendable. Still, growing up as a gay boy taught me how to read people's faces and switch from Venus to Mars in a wink, which has helped. Things have turned out all right for a self-professed gay Latino nerd who's managed to act on principle. Investigating owls inspires me daily and has given me a bird's eye view on human dealings, especially in these times when we can't stop hearing about building walls to keep out people from countries like mine. Though I think of myself an open door. Was growing up gay in my Latin American country of Uruguay different than growing up here? I just know that what I experienced where I lived, but now that I'm an adult and I live here, I have some perspective. Just the other day, my sister texted asking if the puto book she had ordered arrived. I smiled and replied, By puto you mean wonderful, right? I'll check the order status of that book.
Linda Shapiro studied modern dance at the Martha Graham School and taught modern dance while raising her daughters. She eventually traveled abroad extensively as an importer, writing, always writing, wherever she traveled. Linda is a student at the Writing Institute at Sarah Lawrence College and writes with the Scarsdale Library Writing Group, and her fiction, At the Beach, was recently published by Fourth Magazine. Her contribution to our show today is a story titled Chicken Soup for Howie. Please give a warm welcome to Linda Shapiro.
The call from my brother Howie came early in the morning. He'd been traveling and is home in San Francisco. Hi, Lynn. How was your trip, I ask. Okay, just left me tired, a sore throat, but I'm coming to New York next week. Great, I say, hoping he doesn't have strep. I'm sure you'll be better by then. The day before he arrives, I buy parsnips, carrots, celery, onions, dill, and parsley, ingredients for Grandma Fanny's chicken soup. I chop the celery and carrots and add them to the pot. As the steam rises, I think about Howie, the teenager. He lived with me after our mother died. Take care of Howie, my mother had said. Suddenly, I became more than a big sister. The sweet smell of soup fills the kitchen. I add kosher chicken, extra broth, and taste like my grandmother did. I add salt and dill. The next day, when I leave for the airport, I take a water bottle for Howie and cut up an apple. I look for Howie at the arrival gate. Howie, 6 feet, 2 inches, light brown hair appears. I see his handsome face instantly, his backpack hanging off his shoulder. He bends down to hug me. It's been that way since he was 13, taller than I am, having to bend down to meet my petite frame. As soon as we're in the car, I glance at him for a second. How are you feeling? Not sure, about the same. I've got chicken soup for you. He shrugs his shoulders the way he did when he was a boy and didn't want to answer. He used to follow me around with my friends, staying close by my side. Howie is quiet on the ride home from the airport. He sips water, takes a few bites of the apple, and then puts his head back to rest. When we arrive at my house, he's almost asleep. We're here, I say. In the house, Howie drops his bag on the floor and flops down on the couch in the living room. I head for the kitchen to heat the soup. When it's ready, I bring him a bowl. He sits up and looks at me. Listen, Lynn, my friend Ari's not well. It started as a sore throat. I'm sorry, I remember Ari, wearing his white silk yoga robe. Howie smiled for a second. I'm worried. The doctor's worried. Tom and Bob are ill too. If he said the word AIDS that day, I didn't hear it or know what it meant. Now that I think back, he must have. It was 1982. For the moment now, it's 1962. Howie is 16. I'm doing laundry. I pick up his ripped jeans, and a Comfort Inn motel receipt falls out of the pocket. I realize that he must have slept there with his camp friend William instead of staying at Eddie's house, like he had told me. I'm angry, confused, and afraid. I don't let him know what I suspect. Instead, I go to the family doctor. It's okay, Dr. Phillips says. I didn't hug Howie or tell him it's okay after finding the receipt or talking to Dr. Phillips. That's when people whispered, kept secrets. I stayed silent. But now, here we are in my living room, and Howie's not feeling well. He came anyway. This isn't like when he left a motel receipt in his pocket. He's here next to me. We'll call doctors in New York. Maybe you just need rest. We'll get you better. I don't yet understand the agony that lies ahead. I sit next to him on the couch, hold his hand. I smell the soup. I wonder if it's boiling. I'll be right back, Howie. I'm coming right back. I run into the kitchen to turn off the stove.
John Pielmeyer has had a long and distinguished career in theater, which began with his play and the movie Agnes of God. Since then, he's had 3 more plays mounted on Broadway and over 25 film, TV movies, and miniseries produced. He's received the Humanitas Award, 5 Writers Guild Award nominations, and many nominations for his various dramatic works. And his stage adaptation of The Exorcist will be coming to New York next season. John's also recently returned to acting, and he's playing Einstein in Deborah Brevoort's new play, My Lord, What a Night, at the Contemporary American Theater Festival, hence the funny hair and mustache that he's wearing at the moment. John traveled here today from his home in Garrison, New York, to present Girlfriends. Please say hello to John Pielmeyer.
Their names were Mart and Allison, and they came to visit us on occasion when I was a boy, and once or twice we went to visit them. They were school teachers and lived together on the top floor of an old brick house. Mart was tall and thin and wore her dark hair in a bun. Allison was shorter and red-haired and was the kind of woman once called handsome. Her full name was Allison Douglas, which translated in my 5-year-old mind as Alice and Douglas. But my mother referred to them as Mart and Allison, which sounded to me like Martin Allison. It was all so confusing, but oddly appropriate. Their names linked as though they were one person, half female, half male, which strikes me even today as not incorrect. Most of my mother's girlfriends were of the same physical mold. They were either thin and wiry or square and muscular, and all of them were unmarried, but for one who had several children and a mustache. Most were gym teachers, and my mother would describe them as outdoorsy. They first met when she worked as a secretary for the Girl Scouts. They were leaders and administrators, and they were all very fond of her. Whenever they visited, she welcomed them with a kindness shadowed by a certain reluctance I never completely understood. I liked them. They were fun to be around, and they were comfortable in their bodies in ways that other women weren't. They were independent, and they seemed happy. My mother and her girlfriends spent the summers of the 1930s at a Girl Scout camp near their hometown. All were camp counselors, and they bonded, I imagine, sitting around a campfire late at night after their young charges were in bed, talking of the girls and their teenage problems, and celebrating their own love of being in the great outdoors, away from civilization and the tyranny of men. My mother's boss, a woman named Billy, introduced my mother to my father, and my mother always spoke of Billy with great affection, still remembering the sorrow she suffered when Billy moved to another city and another Girl Scout office. She and Billy exchanged Christmas cards every year, and when I was grown, I arranged for my mother and Billy to reconnect. I met Billy for the first time then. She was square and muscular and very outdoorsy. My mother was happy to see her, but the meeting was a little awkward. They didn't have a lot to say to each other, and they never saw one another again. Our next-door neighbor, Georgetta, once referred to one of my mother's girlfriends as a lesbian. Mother was incensed. It was as if Georgetta had accused the woman, in the paranoia of the 1950s, of being a Russian spy. Of course, in the spirit of that metaphor, all of my mother's girlfriends spoke with thick Russian accents. Still, my mother refused to recognize their foreign allegiance. Her Catholicism and the tenor of the times denied these women approval, but when her closest friend, a solid woman named Marion, who had a contagious laugh and eyes that squinted with warmth, when Marion moved in with another woman, my mother refused to judge her. She prayed for her, I'm certain, but she always welcomed Marion gladly when her friend came to visit. The happiest 6 months of my mother's life was when she served as a substitute girls' gym teacher at my high school. The girls confided in her, and they loved her. Years later, when my wife and I celebrated our 10th anniversary with a party and a dance, my mother spent the evening cutting a rug with a lesbian friend of ours. "Your mother's a terrific dancer," our friend told us later. "She would have made a great lesbian."
Catherine Meyer is an award-winning potty-mouth writer, humorist, and activist, writing out loud with humor and angst about social issues, parenting, the perils of midlife, and sadly, gun violence prevention at catherinemeyer.com. A resident of Newtown, Connecticut, she is a reluctant AARP inductee, mom of 4 almost grown and flown kids, and an aspiring writer with the rejections to prove it. Catherine closes Act 1 today with 2 guys in the back of a truck. Won't you please give her a warm welcome, Kate Meyer.
As a kid in the 1970s, I spent weekends wandering up and down the dirty aisles of flea markets, antique shows, and auction halls that often smelled like funnel cake, barn animals, and old lady purses. Instead of soccer and softball or dance, my childhood was spent picking through the attics and boxes and basements and trunks of cars, looking for photography, tin toys, local memorabilia, rag dolls, anything quirky. It had to be unique and clever, saleable. I was to buy low and sell high. My mom and dad, they were school teachers, and they supplemented their salaries by the antique business. So I was inducted at an early age into the weird, wonderful world of wickedly smart people, nomads, and long before the alphabet soup even existed, the LGBTQ community that flocked to the antique business. I had a good eye. My mom would give me a fistful of 20s, her tax ID number, and send me on my way. I would pick the fields of Stormville or Brimfield or the street fairs in New York. Dealers would eyeball this dirty little kid dressed like she just rolled out of the back of a van, because often that's what I did. Antique dealers slept in their cars to get an early start on the selling and, more importantly, the buying. "Can I help you, little girl?" "Just looking," I'd say. I was always mistaken for a pain-in-the-ass kid, the "you break it, you bought it" type, or worse, a shoplifter. But all that would change when I would unroll a fistful of money and ask, "Hey, what's your dealer price on this? How much for cash?" Once I was picking through Brimfield with my mom, and it was late in the day. The customers were gone, so now it's just the dealers shopping. And the dealers were relaxing. They were cooking a little hibachis, drinking bottles of sweaty beer. While thumbing through a box of tin types, I was looking for anything out of the norm. Dead people, Civil War soldiers, circus freaks, animals. I looked up to find 2 men, grown-ups, their legs swinging off the back of their flatbed truck. They were laughing. Their legs were entangled with each other, leaning into each other. One had a guitar, the other a beer. They appeared to be flirting. And then they kissed. On the lips. Long and hard, and their eyes were closed, and mine were wide open. "Mom, what are they doing?" I gawked. She's like, oh, them? They're kissing. And she barely glanced up and then back at the 19th century crock she was looking at that had two folksy birds intricately painted in a deep, vibrant blue. Boys kissing? I had never seen that on Little House on the Prairie, or on Happy Days, or on The Odd Couple. Stop staring, Kathy. It's none of your business. But nothing. You listen to me, she said. What's your problem? Here's the deal. Sometimes men love women, and sometimes women love men. And sometimes men love men and women love women, maybe both, maybe neither. Who cares? What does it really matter to you? How is it your business? I don't. My mom had made it a no big deal, and therefore it remained no big deal. She turned around and walked away, onto the next booth, the next unexpected discovery. But I stayed, because I saw something I hadn't before. Excuse me, sir, how much? I asked, and the dude swung off the back of the truck and came over and looked at the large photo I held out. It was a lithograph of an Indian elephant and some sort of prince or princess, I couldn't tell which, who was standing awkwardly next to the elephant, staring straight into the camera, not daring to blink. Beautiful, stoic, but clearly uncomfortable at the photographer's spotlight shining on him or her. The regal costume elephant was draped in fabric and jewels, ever the docile, confident subject. This, honey, oh, put this down. You better not touch it. It's very expensive. $150. You go find your mom, he said, and he took it from me and put it high out of reach. His condescending smile dismissed a little girl out of place in a field full of dusty memories, mostly unappreciated, some undiscovered, yet valuable to someone somewhere. He turned around and walked away. Is that your best? I shouted after him. Is there any wiggle room at all? How about $100 cash right here? Do we have a deal? And I started pulling the crumpled cash, 20s, from my pockets of my jeans. He turned and smiled and walked back, and we got down to business.
At Read650, we are always working to broaden our submission pool and feature new voices. And right now, with 1 week to go until the July 1st deadline, we're collecting submissions for The Car, which is a broad topic with room for stories about your first or your worst, a road trip or road test, a limo or a lemon, the car wash, the car salesman, the valet, the rental, the accident. Please give this one some thought and encourage the writers you know to consider submitting their work. The live show is Sunday, October 6th. In Westchester County, and it's part of the New Rochelle and Pelham annual Arts Fest weekend. Also some big news to share. We were recently invited to participate in this fall's Big Read, which is funded by the National Endowment for the Arts as part of the Poughkeepsie Library District. It's kind of a wonderful opportunity for us, and we've chosen the topic of home, a really broad topic. And the deadline for that is August 1st for an October 27th show. So thoughts of home, leaving home, coming home, anything related to home, if that inspires you, August 1 is the deadline. All the details are both in your program. They're also under the submissions tab on our website, read650.org. Please follow us on social media and share your email address during the reception so we can stay in touch. If you're thinking about contributing, I say stop thinking and start writing. We would love to hear from you. And just very briefly, I said ORG. Our signage, our branding is still .com, which was an early misstep, so we are rebranding yet again to signal to potential funders and underwriters that we are, in fact, a nonprofit. So the .com is redirecting to the .org, and email addresses still have to change, blah, 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 but that's what that's about. We are going to pause here for a short break of about 20 minutes, but please stay with us because we've got more great storytelling coming up in Act 2. And for our Facebook and live stream viewers, we've selected a few audience favorites from our video library, and we hope you enjoy them. So now stretch your legs, wet your whistles, and please join us back here in 20 minutes for a great second half. I'm Edward McCann, and this is Read 650.
By myself anymore, hard to be sure.
We'll return with the second half of Read 650's live show after this brief intermission. While you wait, here are a few favorite performances from our Read 650 archive. We hope you enjoy them. and we hope you'll stay with us.
Godfathers is a loose and largely inaccurate description for two men, a couple as it turns out, that I've known all of my life. I use it for lack of a better word, not technically related, but far closer than any aunt, uncle, or grandparent ever could be, and supremely hip to the family gossip. I once confessed my misnomer to them as they chauffeured me around New England on college visits. How about fairy godfathers, Ed had joked at the time. Richard and Ed are family friends who have been close with my mother and grandparents since Mom was a little girl. As a child, they showered me in love and attention, they sent me letters on holidays, and they brought me books during their annual visits. When they came into town, they came together. When they left together. I never knew life without them, and I thought of them as nothing more or less than loving family members who I couldn't wait to see again. My realization came the summer I was 13 years old. Richard and Ed were staying with us, and everyone was sitting on the back porch of my family home. Mom, Dad, Richard, and Ed at the patio table with the big umbrella shielding them from the summer sun. Me, a few feet away on the shady back porch steps with my arms around the family dog. I looked at the four of them, their chairs arranged so that my parents and our guests were mirrored across the table, and for no particular reason, I recognized that I was staring at two couples. Oh my God, Richard and Ed are gay. I'd heard about these gay people, and suddenly here they were, sitting in my backyard and part of my family. I sat there on the steps, stunned into silence, as if I had just uncovered a deep family secret. I grew up in a home with good politics and common human decency, which is to say that my silence wasn't judgment or foreboding, but a mental pause, to categorize the previously uncategorized, put a new label on people whose labels I thought I knew, insert an otherness. Maybe it was the problematic vernacular I heard flying around my middle school, or my crossing of the age threshold to be included in discussions of politics at the dinner table, or maybe it was all of those Will and Grace reruns. But somehow, my heteronormative worldview had cracked open just wide enough for me to comprehend that this pair of pseudo-relatives were in just as much of a romantic relationship as my aunts and uncles, grandmas and grandpas, mom and dad. Even then, I felt stupid for not realizing sooner. I tried to nonchalantly mention my newfound fact to my mom a few days later. Richard and Ed are gay. Both a statement and a question. She furrowed her eyebrows, amused, before confirming, as if to say, "Duh, kid, water is wet." My cover was blown. After the rush of surprise came intense joy and relief. It was as if I had experienced the excitement of a new relationship and the satisfaction of witnessing years of happiness all in an instant. My fairy godfathers were in love and happy and would be always. Eventually, I joined them at the table in the sun, approaching slowly and acting normal so that no one might suspect my recent discovery. I watched Richard and Ed closely for the rest of the trip. They worked so seamlessly in tandem and gravitated around one another with the ease and stability of planets. Nothing new, but now obviously meaningful. My understanding of their connection did not shift. The constellation of loving relationships I aspired to merely grew. How odd it was to assign a word to something that I had always known.
My younger brother Drew is down from Boston the day before Thanksgiving. I'm up from New York City. We'll both be spending the night at our mom's house in Larchmont, where we grew up. We meet at the Village Inn, make our way over to Cavaliers, then end up at Cartoons, drinking beers and shots of frozen Sambuca until last call. When we get home, we stumble upstairs to the attic. There are still 2 beds up here, one just a mattress on the floor. I'm ready to crash, a pillow never feeling so good. Drifting off, I hear my brother say, "Are you awake?" Barely. I have something to tell you, but if you're too tired, shit, I think. Now, tonight of all nights, tonight he's going to tell me. What's up? He is hesitating. Then he blurts out, I'm gay. What took you so long? Drew is pushing 30. We all figured he was gay for at least the last 15 years. I just couldn't tell anyone. I wasn't sure. I mean, I was sure, but I didn't want to be. I kept hoping something would change. And I knew it was a sin. But you know, I don't care. I know. What about when you were up at Purchase College? Practically every other student is gay. I introduced you to some of my gay friends there. You must have come out then. I couldn't. I was afraid. It was too close to home. You were at Purchase for 4 years, and you never? No, I never did anything. Not until I moved to Boston. My God. I'm awake now, dumbfounded. I reach over to my jacket and pull out a joint from the top pocket. When I strike the match, I look over at Drew, his head propped on his elbow, worry on his face. We are quiet for a while, passing the joint back and forth. The glow from the ember lighting our faces whenever we take a hit. So, how old were you when you knew? I was pretty young, maybe 7. I guess I always knew. Remember when you took Mom's razor and tried to shave your legs? He snorts, yeah, I didn't know to use soap. Cut yourself up pretty good. We're both laughing now. We better be quiet, he says. We're right above Mom's room. None of us knew what to think when you did that. Sorry if I gave you a hard time about it back then. And sorry for those times I called you faggot. Didn't even know what it really meant. The joint is finished now. I'm fading, but Drew is still going. I'm afraid to tell Mom how she'll react. You know how she can be. I'm not sure I could take it if she... I'll tell her. I'll tell them all if you want me to. I know I should do it. I just... Don't worry about it. I'll tell Mom. I think she'll be fine. Who cares what Dad thinks? Debbie will be real upset you didn't tell her first. Eileen won't say anything when I tell her. Then she'll start talking about something totally unrelated. Don't tell Mom until I'm back in Boston, okay? 2 days later, after I drop Drew off at the Amtrak in New Rochelle, I go back to talk to Mom. When I tell her, she's quiet for a while. I guess it's no surprise. He's worried how you'll take it. Well, he is what he is. I think he's afraid you won't love him anymore. She turns away, looking out the window for what seems a long time. Then she looks right at me, eyes locked on mine. You tell him he has nothing to worry about. Tell him he will always be my baby.
My best friend in college came back from Thanksgiving break and told me that her father was dying of cancer. Within a few weeks, she told all of us, and we lavished her with love, sympathy, and concern. I envied her because I too was bereft, but I couldn't tell anyone why. It was 1975, and you didn't say out loud that you'd come home unexpectedly on a Saturday night and found your mother in bed with another woman. The only person I told was my boyfriend, in a whispered telephone conversation later that same evening after I'd gotten deeply stoned. "What does that mean?" he asked. "Are you a lesbian too?" His tone was more curious than disapproving. The next day, my mother denied everything I'd seen with my own eyes. The candles still lit on the dining room table, the food half-eaten on the plates, the pushback empty chairs, the full bed when, unannounced, I naively opened my mother's bedroom door. She denied every single thing with a straight face and then asked me to join her ladies' tennis group in an hour. One of them had had to cancel and they needed a fourth. Could I fill in? I declined. My parents were divorced and I was the youngest of 4. My sister had come out several years earlier, though strangely I don't remember how or when. But on the day after I graduated from college, my brother came out to me. He and my mother and sisters and I had all gone for a cold swim in a lake not far from campus and were peacefully drying in the sun on a deck. There was no preamble, and his statement was declarative. I'm gay. His announcement hijacked my graduation, but having a gay sibling wasn't uncommon. Having a lesbian mother was. So at our family gatherings, heteros were in the minority. It was strange at times, but there were benefits. Meals were outstanding, with everyone pitching in to cook. And during holidays, we sometimes went to a gay bar in the neighborhood, though my mother claimed it was because the music was good. As a teenager, she had made up a middle name for herself for her high school yearbook, Summer Belle. And as my mother, she had once danced on our dining room table. Life in my family wasn't bad. Still, my mother wouldn't acknowledge anything to me. At first, I told only people to whom I was close. The years passed and times changed. Heather Has Two Mommies was published in 1989. Its target readership was 4 to 8-year-olds. I was 33. As a standard issue suburban white girl, I started to own My Mother the Lesbian as something that made me interesting. Now I told people I wanted to impress. But though my mother was less guarded with my siblings, she continued to hide herself from me. She called the woman with whom she shared a bedroom in the house that they owned together her friend. She didn't acknowledge it even as I sat with her on the day she died, holding her hand. I was pregnant with her first grandchild, and I desperately wanted some last words from her, either of confession or wisdom. She said nothing. She made me the executor of her estate, but we never discussed what I had seen so many years earlier. I honored her wish for privacy, and she died gracefully at age 67, 3 months before my daughter was born. Her silence, not her sexual orientation, distanced us from each other in a way that can never be fixed. And I still wonder why she felt the need to protect me from something that I didn't fear.
My first visit to San Francisco was in 1981, the year the gay cancer emerged. By the time the disease was named AIDS in September of 1982, my older brother Peter had already experienced the loss of dozens of friends and neighbors. Every day, someone else developed symptoms, he told me in one of our monthly phone calls. Guess it's just a matter of time for me. In 1984, Peter got tested and was diagnosed with ARC, AIDS-related complex. What does that mean? I asked over the telephone. It means I'm not dying, at least not yet. Because we lived on opposite coasts, ours was primarily a long-distance telephone relationship. And while Peter stayed physically healthy over the next 5 years, his life was consumed with suffering and death of countless friends. He fell into a deep depression and started drinking heavily. His phone calls started with his rage about the lack of attention from the world and ended with his sobs about the guilt he felt at still being alive. He left voice messages threatening suicide and went on binges with his phone off the hook for weeks at a time. I was worried. I wanted to be supportive, but it seemed impossible from 3,000 miles away. In 1987, I bought a one-way ticket to San Francisco. But after 4 months sharing Peter's one-bedroom cottage and observing firsthand all of the sickness and death that surrounded him, I wimped out and abandoned my brother. Then his best friend was diagnosed and died. Then Peter graduated from ARC to full-blown AIDS. He spent the next decade as a pioneer in living with the disease. He signed up for all of the clinical drug trials. He tried alternative herbal treatments, acupuncture, meditation, yoga. He joined a long-term survivor group. Through it all, he kept me posted in our monthly calls. "How are you feeling? You sound funny," I said. "It's the lesions in my mouth. It's called hairy leukoplakia." Ugh, sounds gross. "It's really painful. Mega doses of acyclovir clears it up, but then I get bloody diarrhea. But that helps get rid of the parasites eating my intestines. It's just a drag when I can't hobble to the bathroom in time because of the plantar's warts on the bottom of my feet. But you know, little sister, it's all nothing compared to the eyeball injections I need to clear up the CMV, cyclomegalovirus, in my eyes. I don't want to go blind." "What's your T-cell count?" "Below 10, he mumbled. "Hey, my group is doing a newsletter, and we had a contest to name it. I suggested we call it I Ain't Dead Yet." For 10 years, I flew out to be with my brother as often as possible. But then I got married and had children, and the time between visits grew longer. My last trip to see Peter was Memorial Day weekend of the year 2000. "I should have come when the hospice nurse called last month," I told Gwen, his friend and head of his hospice team. "But I couldn't get away between work and 2 toddlers. It's okay. You're here now," Gwen said. "He's a bit out of it with the morphine and all." I spent the next few days with Peter and his family of friends. We reminisced, we laughed, we cried, we waited. On the 3rd day, Peter told me I should leave. "You have to get back to your kids, your job, your life." I was both relieved and riddled with guilt. I kissed his forehead and told him I was sorry for abandoning him again. The phone call came on May 30th. "Sweet Peter is gone," Gwen said. "I'll send you some ashes." I keep them, still, in a small wooden box by the telephone.
We now return to the second half of Read 650's live show.
Jesse, is there an audio engineer in the house? Tom, can you open the mic? Check, check. Time. We're up, we're live, and we are back. Welcome back to our second half. If you are just joining us on Facebook or YouTube, this is Read 650, and I'm Ed McCann. Today's show, Stonewall plus 50, True Stories of Power, Pride, and Progress, is coming to you live from City Winery here in New York City and acknowledges the 50th anniversary of the Stonewall Uprising and the launch of the modern gay rights movement in the United States. Before we bring up our next writer, I want to acknowledge a few of the people who've helped make this afternoon possible. First of all, thank you to our host, City Winery, and its founder and CEO, Michael Dorf, for making us welcome here for the 3rd time. Which, incidentally, this is also our last time ever here because, as some of you may not know, the Wrecking Ball is coming for this building. Yes, Disney bought the whole block, and there's a new ABC television headquarters that's going to be constructed here. You boo hiss. But City Winery will be reborn in a new flagship location at Pier 57. And if you Google, there was a piece in Billboard magazine about it. If you Google Billboard and City Winery, you'll see the release, you'll see the artist renderings, and there's a remarkable, beautiful, big, better new space that will be right there on the river. So we anticipate, they anticipate being open early in 2020, and we are hopeful about producing some events there in the new space. So keep an eye on that. I am also grateful for the talents of our videographers today, Kevin O'Connor and Natara Ortiz, as well as our production associate, Blake Rozelle, for our chief audio engineer, Jesse Chasen, who makes us all sound so good, and to our hair and makeup engineer, Jessica Rayo, who, well, she does the best she can with what she's given. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica. Thanks to the members of our editorial committee who read and review all the submissions, and you know who you are. And a very special thank you today to Jane Kaup, who handles our marketing and communication, such an essential thing, and she does such a remarkable job. And let's give them all their very own round of applause. We're so grateful. Yes, hashtag gratitude, I think, would be appropriate there. Read650 is a nonprofit literary organization with a mission to promote writers. And in a publishing environment where it's often challenging to find or to hear new voices, we take that mission very seriously, and we have created a sparkling quality platform for writers, a forum for true personal stories told 5 minutes and 650 words at a time. Read650 shows are not open mic events. There's nothing random or improvisational about what we do. We place a strong emphasis on the craft of writing. And the submissions featured on our stage were selected and vetted by an editorial committee of essayists, novelists, memoirists, journalists, and playwrights. And that's all before they make it to the copy editor, before that text is all turned into anthologies, the printed books that you'll see for sale in the corner. Today's event is made possible, as they say on PBS, by viewers like you. The revenue from ticket sales that we share with City Winery enables us to present this quality work in this quality way, and your purchase of that ticket is an investment in Read650, and that supports our mission to promote the writers, and we're very grateful about that. In addition to our live events and social media and robust website and YouTube channel, another way that we promote writers is by making the essays from our shows available in these anthologies. I happen to have some right here. They are printed collections of the true stories originally performed on our stages. For example, we have On Fathers, Our Dogs, Summer Jobs, which was our first show here, which was a great one, Tales of New York, What We Wore. These stories, which were originally performed on our stages, are available on Amazon at $10 each. But following today's show, you can purchase any 3 for $20. And I am sorry to our live stream viewers, this is one of the perks of being here. You got to be here to get this deal. But we now have more than 20 titles to choose from, and the stories that you're hearing here today are actually collected in a volume that is available, and we have writers here who will be happy to autograph those volumes for you as well. So along with your ticket sales and donation, the sales of these books, filled with some of the finest 2-page stories you'll find anywhere, help fund all the work they do. They're beautifully designed, they make great gifts. They're perfect for your waiting room or your Airbnb rental, or they would look much nicer on your bedside than that messy stack of New Yorkers that you don't seem to get to. And at just 2 pages long, these stories are perfect bedtime reading, silently or aloud to your bedmate, whomever that might be. So while you're sipping wine and chatting with the writers and each other following the show, please consider purchasing some of these books today for yourself or for someone you care about. I also want to mention that writer Deborah Batterman, who's here in the house, has also donated 20 signed copies of her debut novel, Just Like February, which are also available for sale here today. Told from the perspective of the family's youngest member, it's a coming-of-age story with an LGBT theme that carries the reader from the 1960s through the 80s. And it just picked up a 2019 Next Generation Indie Book Award for a first novel. And it, too, is specially priced at $10 and is included in our amazing 3 for $20 offer. So you'll find those over there, too, and they're signed. So in addition to your ticket purchase, your purchase of these books and your generous tax-deductible contributions are all investments in us and in what we do and in the arts and in the individual writers whose work we present to you. And you can always learn more or purchase books or make a tax-deductible donation at read650.org. And again, we all thank you for coming out on this beautiful day when you could be doing so many other things, that you're here to support writing, and that means a great deal to us. So back to our show. We begin Act 2 with Richard Solano, who is a writer, he's a painter, and he's a web designer with a lifelong interest in the investing arena. Today, Rick runs My Ink Shines, a marketing agency he launched, and he's a contributor to the blog of the University of Pennsylvania's Morris Arboretum. He recently published a short story about a soldier returning home from Pakistan who faces a mysterious force, and he's currently working on a novel, The Woman in B208. He traveled here from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania today to present a summer stage. Please give a very warm welcome to Rick Solano.
I was a short, slight 11-year-old boy in the summer of 1969, a time when I happened upon a new form of self-identity. I'm a faggot, I said to myself in our backyard. Without an idea of its meaning, I spoke and enunciated the word with conviction. I continued the proclamation as I tried to twirl around my mother's clothesline pole. I relished that backyard spot because copper-colored butterflies flitted about our nearby lilac bush. Other than reading under our big maple, which I did to nearly a compulsive excess, waltzing with butterflies and smelling the lilacs were some of my favorite ways to spend that summer. The announcement of my new moniker was not born from an epiphany about my sexuality. I lacked any idea about that facet of life. Understanding sex at that point would have required knowledgeable siblings or parents eager to launch into the topic. I'd repeat to myself, I'm a faggot, because other boys in our neighborhood, older, cocky, athletic chaps transitioning to young men with muscles, had attached that identifier to me. When this name-calling started, I didn't mind. I knew that I was different from these boys, in obvious ways and in ones yet undiscovered. Certain comforting truths existed on my stage of naivete. I figured that faggot was a description that fit some boys. The world was all loving, and much like the reliability of the butterflies outside, movie music was always playing in my bedroom. I was obsessed with a recording featuring my favorite performer, the soundtrack to the Julie Andrews film Star. Owing to the movie's abysmal box office results, the album was nearly impossible to find. I unearthed mine in a clearance bin at Woolworth's and handily paid the 25-cent cost. A fan to the core, I adored everything Julie sang. Gertrude Lawrence and her friendship with Noel Coward, the story around which the film was wrapped, were unknowns to me. Before dinner, I lip-synced to the tunes and watched my performance in my dresser mirror. Mom, in the kitchen, had no idea that in my mind's eye, I had become Ella Shields, the entertainer of early 1900s British music halls, portrayed singing Burlington Birdie from Bow. The jacket-back's photo showed Andrews spinning an umbrella for this number. I substituted a bamboo cane I had won at the previous summer's fair. Alone in my room, I imagined that most other boys were not having this much fun, or at least this kind of fun. And while it seemed that no one wanted to be my friend at that point, I didn't mind too much. I imagined that Julie Andrews might have been a compatriot, convinced each time her jubilant rendition of the soundtracks, "Has Anyone Seen Our Ship?" filled my spirits with helium. The wrap-up of each summer vacation, however, delivered anxiety about the end of the hiatus and unknowns of the new school year. And that year was worse. My mostly pleasant father was angry with me, his rage born from what I told my mother about me being a faggot. "It's what you call a small, weaker boy," I explained to her. My brawny father, an athlete since college, saw things differently. He said to me while spitting from both anger and the word he emphasized, that I was sissified. He delivered it like one might state, "That hotel room is infested with bedbugs." The emphasis was on the disgusting part. At that point, all I had was his immediate visceral reaction without the benefit of time and its ability to buff sharp edges. I figured that some people thought that faggots were terrible, even repulsive, but I hadn't begun to understand why. My father didn't or couldn't explain his meaning, leaving me to cling to my last summer of ignorant bliss. And that remaining week with Julie Andrews, books, flowers, and butterflies.
Lisa E. Davis is a teacher whose novel Under the Mink recreates the 1940s world of mafia-owned village nightclubs. Her most recent nonfiction work recovers one of the mostly forgotten stories of the Red Scare, America's communist witch hunt of the 1940s and 50s. It's called Undercover Girl, the lesbian informant who helped the FBI bring down the Communist Party. Both books are available on Amazon, and Lisa's contribution to today's show is a piece entitled Turning the Page. Won't you please welcome Lisa E. Davis.
Buddy Kent seemed at home in her tailored slacks and long-sleeved shirt, open at the neck. In Paris or Greenwich Village, she held a photo album on her lap and pointed. That was Mickey Leff. She went to Paris to learn the language, then passed herself off as an Egyptian countess, she said. Buddy turned another page to a Daikin profile and tux, and that was Freddie. Her club was Chez Freddie. Her accent was Brooklyn French. Marlena Dietrich set it up for her. Our team of LGBTQ historians assigned to interview Buddy, an active member of SAGE, senior activist in the gay environment, about Stonewall, sighed in unison. Buddy flipped a page in her album to a dashing figure in white tie and tux. "Who's that?" I asked. She laughed. "That's me. When I was a chorus boy at the 181 Club, 181 2nd Avenue. My colleagues looked bewildered. We had talked about interviewing Buddy to record the fears and frustrations of older lesbians before gay liberation, but she hadn't shown much interest in our questionnaire. When did you come out? What was your first sexual experience? How did the gay liberation movement change your life? Were you at Stonewall? I asked her again what she knew about Stonewall. I was on my way home from St. Vincent's, she began. I'd been working as an X-ray technician at the hospital for about 5 years after the Page 3 closed down. That was the club Buddy owned with her girlfriend Jackie Howe and Kiki Hall, who had his own touring drag show. I saw the crowd, she continued, and walked over to Sheridan Square. It was my neighborhood. I asked her what she thought. It was amazing to see the gay boys give the cops a dose of their own medicine. They'd been beating up gay people, girls too, throwing them in jail in the village forever. She explained that gay clubs had mob protection. They paid off the cops, but it wasn't always enough. She went on to say that there had been a big raid at the 181 Club because the neighbors had complained about the boys and dykes going in and out in drag. We had to watch our P's and Q's, pimps and queers. After that, Buddy said, and suddenly looked pensive, somebody must have slipped up at Stonewall, must have missed a payment, or the heat was on from the top. Maybe it was an election year, always trying to clean up New York. But you know, she added in a serious tone, we would never have come out into the streets that way if it hadn't been for the Vietnam War protest and Dr. King's civil rights marches in the 60s. Like a revolution, I suggested. Long overdue, and we were proud to be part of it. With an air of nostalgia, Buddy turned back to the photo album and flipped another page. Who's that? It was a woman walking a snake on a leash down a city street. Buddy laughed. Oh, that's Sarita, the biggest strip act in New York. She worked with snakes. Snakes? Did this qualify as lesbian courage before the gay liberation movement? Yeah, Sarita made a lot of money, but snakes were not my style. She turned another page to what looked like a publicity photo of a young Buddy, one panel in tie, top hat and tails, the other stripped down to only the bare essentials. The caption read, Bubbles Kent, exotic dancer, a nightclub on Sullivan Street, Jimmy Kelly's. I tried not to sound puritanical. You had a strip act, male to female? Yeah, Buddy smiled. I guess now they'd call it trans. It was always around. The Wall Street gang, the mobsters, the bridge and tunnel crowd. That's what they came down to the village to see. We were way ahead of our time. Yes, there was a village nightlife before, and way before Stonewall.
Patrick Ryan is a recipient of the National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction and the former associate editor of Granta. He's the current editor of One Story, and his distinguished career has included a prize-winning short story collection and 3 young adult novels. His short stories have appeared in Tin House, Crazy Horse, and Yale Review, and he makes his first trip to the Read650 stage this afternoon to present Democracy Was. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Patrick Ryan.
Democracy was being told by my mother that I shouldn't marry anyone without first living with that person for a year. Compatibility, she said, was crucial to a good marriage. I wanted to ask her if she wished she'd lived with my father for a year before marrying him, but I didn't. It was 1976, and I was 11 years old. She assumed, as I did, that one day I would marry a woman. Democracy was watching Barney Miller with my family and laughing at the gay characters and at the way the straight cops reacted to them. My father laughed along with us, but he wasn't amused when I started mincing around the living room the way the gay characters had. You know, he said, they didn't used to have characters like that on TV. What about Mr. Mooney? I asked, still mincing. What about Uncle Arthur? What about Dr. Smith? Democracy was discovering upon turning 18 that when I did my compulsory registration for the Selective Service, I could also register as a conscientious objector. I told my parents my intention, and my father became irate. Only communists and homosexuals were conscientious objectors, he said. My mother defended me, said the choice was mine to make. Democracy was cowering with my college boyfriend in his dorm room, while some of the other young men who lived on his floor tried to kick the door in, yelling that they would kill us both if they got the chance. They didn't know us, but had caught on. My boyfriend called the campus police and explained what was happening. The banging and shouting were so loud that he couldn't hear the response on the other end of the line. "Can you repeat that?" he asked. "You're going to have to deal with this yourselves," the voice said. Democracy was coming out to my recently divorced mother when I was 23 and having her cry and say she worried I'd get AIDS, and coming out to my father when I was 25 and having him reply without the slightest change in his expression, "I know that. I've known since you were 18. When I asked him how he'd known, he said, "You're not a communist." Democracy was telling my father 9 years later that I'd been seeing someone named Fred, that it was serious, and that I was in love. "I'm not saying I understand it," my father said, "but I want you to be happy." I thanked him for that. He said, "You're welcome." Democracy was arguing with my father about don't ask, don't tell. While I clearly had no intention of ever joining the military, I said, "Do you think that if I were in the Army, I should have to hide who I am from my commander?" The word commander felt ridiculous on my tongue. But it didn't matter. We were having two different conversations. "What I'm saying," he told me, "is I don't think it's healthy to have homosexuals and heterosexuals in combat together." I pointed out that he'd never been in combat. Democracy was one of our last conversations not long before he died. He told me he thought the Defense of Marriage Act was reasonable. "How can you think that?" I said. "I'm your son. It should be left up to the states," he said. Appalled, I spun a scenario wherein Fred and I were on a road trip, and as we drove across state lines, we were married in one state and not married in the next. Married, not married, state after state. And let's say we got into a car wreck in one of the anti-gay marriage states, and I had to be taken to the hospital, and Fred wasn't allowed to visit me because he wasn't considered family. Was that okay? "Don't bully me," my father said. "You don't have to drive through those states. Who's holding a gun to your head?" I left the question unanswered. Thank you.
Martin Wilson grew up in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where both of his novels take place. His first young adult or YA novel, What They Always Tell Us, was the winner of an Alabama Author Award and is a Lambda Literary Award finalist. His second novel, We Now Return to Regular Life, is also a Lambda Literary Award finalist. He currently lives in New York City, where he works as a publicist at a publishing house. and his contribution to today's show is The One Place. Please give a warm welcome to Martin Wilson.
I write novels for and about teenagers. All of my novels are set in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, where I grew up. Over a year ago, I started writing my third book. For a variety of reasons, I wanted to set the story in late 1990 and early 1991. But I had a few doubts, and I foresaw objections from possible future editors. Why set it then? Why not face the current reality? As I grappled with this, I happened to go see the movie Love, Simon. As a work of art, it's not breaking any ground. But in some ways, it was revolutionary. Here was a romantic comedy about a gay teenager, a gay version of the types of movies I loved growing up, like Pretty in Pink or 16 Candles. In those movies, though, gay kids were invisible. Gay kids didn't exist. But we were there all along, of course. And that's when I realized, yes, I could and should set my novel in the early 1990s. In movies, TV shows, and books then, we were rarely, if ever, part of the story. Even in the real world, our gay teenage lives were secret, repressed. Back then, our stories were never told. But at least one of them would be now. Even though I have lived in New York for over 15 years, I still identify myself as a Southerner. More than any deep-seated love for the place, it's probably because I want to show that all types of people come from there, like a gay, atheist liberal who isn't into football and barbecue. But maybe I also hold on to my Southern identity because it was the place that formed me. There are a lot of famous quotes about home out there, but one of my favorite quotes about home, or about place in general, comes from Nobel laureate Alice Munro. In your life, there are a few places, or maybe only the one place, where something happened, and then there are all the other places. For me, that one place is Tuscaloosa, in particular Central High School. It's not unique for me to say I hated high school, but those 4 years were the loneliest of my life. I was bullied with words, though luckily not with physical acts. And I should admit that I had congenial relationships with some of my classmates. Teachers liked me, I got good grades. I was even on the tennis team. I had a few protective girlfriends, not girlfriends, who showed me daily kindness. But on Friday nights, on weekends, I was at home alone. Interacting with me at school was fine, for some people, I guess. But in the real world, where normal teenage things occur, I was excluded from that. No one wanted to be associated with the fag. There were no parties, no football games. It goes without saying there was no romance. The prom was something I only experienced by watching John Hughes movies. So I don't look back at high school with much fondness, but I do look back with gratitude. Because if I hadn't been trapped in my own mind, if I hadn't lapsed into forced solitude, I'd never have put pen to paper. Another favorite writer of mine, Ann Tyler, once said, "I write because I want more than one life." That sentence has always felt right to me, because in writing novels about teenagers, I'm going back in time and reinserting myself, through my gay characters, into another life. And in my novel, set in the exact years I suffered through, I'm giving life to a story that lived only in the shadows. Because even if I wasn't whooping up at the prom, or dating a cheerleader, or doing keg stands at parties, I was there all along. We all were.
Bruce Shenitz is a writer, editor, librarian, content strategist, and taxonomist, though usually not all at the same time. His reporting and essays have appeared in Out, the New York Times, and several anthologies. He is the editor of the essay anthology, The Man I Might Become, Gay Men Write About Their Fathers, which won a Lambda Literary Award. And Bruce returns to our stage today to present In the Shadow of Stonewall. Please say hello to Bruce Shenitz.
When I tell people that I grew up in Manhattan, less than 2 miles from the site of the Stonewall Riots, they sometimes think that my childhood was filled with unicorns and rainbows. But I was in junior high school in 1969, and like most of the rest of the world, I knew nothing of the events that became synonymous with the gay rights movement. I think I first heard the name Stonewall a couple of years later in high school, which was actually a couple of blocks closer to the site. Even though my high school was considered to be an activist hotbed, we marched for peace and walked out to protest against the dress code. I knew of only one student who was openly gay. He also wore a Black Panthers button. Both of these facts seemed equally exotic and dangerous to a white Jewish adolescent from middle-class Stuyvesant Town. When I came out in my 20s, the apartment's proximity to Greenwich Village may have been in the back of my family's minds. One of the first things my mother said was, maybe if we had moved to the suburbs, this wouldn't have happened. I'm not quite sure whether she thought that a greater distance from the city's premier gayborhood or merely the salubrious effects of a backyard would have straightened me out. To her credit, my mother eventually got over it. Both she and my father went to Parents and Friends of Lesbians and Gays and even became members of the gay synagogue for a couple of years in order to support it. Whatever ambivalence they may have had, they put it aside and they became model parents of a gay. The original Stonewall no longer exists, but Christopher Street is still the location of many rallies, including the one on June 15, 2015, the day the Supreme Court legalized same-sex marriage nationally. It also turned out to be the closest I've ever come to picking someone up at the Stonewall. When I finally got up the nerve to approach a handsome man leaning against a building just west of the now iconic bar, he turned out to be a charming visitor from London. He also turned out to be straight. This is not how I expected this conversation to go, I said, but we both had a laugh and even had drinks while he was staying in New York. While the Londoner and I were talking, my phone rang. It was my mother, excited about the Supreme Court decision. "Don't feel you have to run off and rush to get married," she admonished me. By that time, my mother had been a widow for a year, and I had lost my husband 4 years earlier, words I couldn't have imagined writing in 1969. In the intervening years, the Stonewall went through its own changes. It closed in 1970, and the space was occupied by businesses ranging from a pizza joint to a bagel shop before reopening as a bar in 1990. The current incarnation occupies only about half the space of the original and has been completely rebuilt. For many years, I thought of it as a manufactured monument, one with no genuine history other than its name and location. But New York is often like that. The past is erased, razed, occasionally preserved, sometimes repurposed. I walk on streets I've known since childhood, but they are completely new and strange to me. And then a sound, a smell, or a visual remnant that escaped the wrecker's ball suddenly evokes a past life. The Stonewall and I don't really have much of a shared history, though sometimes I feel like I'm too just a couple of decades away from becoming an ancient ruin, or if not a national monument like the Stonewall now is. And yet, I carry histories within me as I move through the years, even as I hope to renew myself as change continues around me. Edward McCann is an award-winning writer-producer and the founder and editor of Read650, celebrating the spoken word with live events in New York City and elsewhere. A frequent contributor to Milieu magazine, Ed's features and essays have been published in literary journals and anthologies, as well as national magazines, including The Sun, Country Living, The Irish Echo, Better Homes and Gardens, Good Housekeeping, and others. His essay, Pregnant Again, was selected for the anthology Listen to Your Mother, published by Putnam. He lives and writes in the Hudson River Valley and closes today's show with Timeline. Please welcome Ed McCann.
I was born in New York City in the spring of 1963, and I came of age in the mid-1970s in Florida during a sexual revolution I didn't participate in. An altar boy raised Catholic in a large working-class family, by the time I was 13, I was an isolated, badly dressed kid in the throes of a confusing hormonal storm, struggling to understand who and what I was and what I wasn't. I knew I was different, defective even, and I didn't see myself reflected anywhere in popular culture. And I didn't identify with those men who sparked an uncomfortable glimmer of recognition. There was no Rosie or Ellen or Will and Grace then. I had Charles Nelson Riley and Paul Lynde delivering snarky punchlines on daytime game shows. The culture I grew up in told me that being gay was bad, depraved, and dangerous. And as a teenager, I wasn't thinking we and us. I was thinking them, whom I most definitely did not want to be. When I was 14, I watched with a creeping sense of dread as wholesome, orange juice drinking Anita Bryant, who referred to gays as human garbage, ran the Save Our Children campaign to uphold discrimination based on sexual orientation. It was the same year Florida legislatures approved a measure prohibiting gay adoption. And the same year, I stopped going to confession and attending Mass. When I was 15, San Francisco Mayor George Moscone and openly gay city supervisor Harvey Milk were assassinated. At 16, the man who killed them was acquitted of first-degree murder. The same year, a California ballot initiative sought to ban gays and lesbians from working in public schools. At 17, Ronald Reagan defeated Jimmy Carter by, in part, campaigning that Carter catered to homosexuals. At 18, the news was full of frightening stories about a new gay cancer that the Reverend Jerry Falwell, founder of the Moral Majority, said wasn't just God's punishment for homosexuals. It was God's punishment for a society that tolerated them. So by the time I was 19, a celibate, self-hating sophomore, it seemed my friends were all in sexual relationships, but the very idea of sex with anyone was unnerving and potentially fatal. After college, I began my career, I dated women, and at 24, I moved in with a woman who pursued me and claimed to appreciate my ambiguities. We shared a house, and then we shared a bed. We shared cats and a dog and friends and many candlelit dinners, and we were very happy for a time. When I was 27, we married, and I was relieved to feel so normal and to have achieved the life I was told I should want. I was a married man with a mortgage and a lawn to mow. My wife and I had believed that love would conquer all, but we were living a kind of lie, and after 8 years together, we took it all apart. During those years and in the years since, attitudes and the cultural landscape changed dramatically, becoming more accepting of gay women and men, electing them to office, and reflecting them, us, in Hollywood films and on television shows that no longer reduced us to criminals or punchlines. By the time I reached 40, I'd become more accepting of myself, happily settled in a loving relationship with the man I'd ultimately marry, a privilege, and perhaps more important, a constitutional right granted us by the grace of a single Supreme Court vote. A vote connected by a long, battered thread to the men and women who raised hell and energized a movement on that long ago summer night at the Stonewall Inn. So I'm not living the life that I dreamt of, the life that I once wanted so badly. But these days and nights I'm living honestly as myself, no longer cloaked in shame, and that's something I couldn't have ever imagined as a kid. And for that, I am grateful. I'd like to have all the writers join me on stage. Have all the writers come up. Kate, all the writers on stage. Public opinion in America regarding gay rights has changed tremendously in recent decades. And it is one of the most profound shifts in public attitudes ever recorded. 50 years ago, the idea of legally sanctioned marriage between gay partners was inconceivable, and yet today, we have a gay married presidential candidate whose primary liability at the moment might be uncertainty about the pronunciation of his name. I wanted to close the show today with a quote from tennis legend and gay rights pioneer Martina Navratilova, who paved the way for all gay athletes when she came out in 1981. She said, "Just by being out, you're doing your part. It's like recycling. You're doing your part for the environment if you recycle, and you're doing your part for the gay movement if you're out." More famously, when a male British reporter once demanded, "Are you still a lesbian?" she shot back, "Are you still the alternative?" Game, set, match. Thank you again for joining us today, and please don't rush off. While we wrap things up, you can enjoy some additional refreshments. You can sip and nibble and schmooze with the writers and each other and talk about reading and writing in libraries and these beautiful, incredibly well-priced books, which we have available in the corner. Edited individual videos of today's readings will soon be available with many others on our YouTube channel, so please visit and subscribe to the channel. Please like our Facebook page, and please explore the website and join our emailing list by sharing your email address, which we will never share with anyone else, by the way. No matter how much they beg and plead, we will never share it. Finally, if you enjoyed what you heard here today, please consider investing in our mission to promote writers and quality spoken word events with a tax-deductible donation, or by helping us identify possible grant support. We are figuring this out in real time, and some of the most wonderful things that have happened for us have been people that have approached us and said, "Hey, do you know about this thing? Or you want to check out this thing?" And it's really has contributed so much to our growth, and those contributions are as valuable as the cash that you might drop in a basket. And I just want to tell you how grateful we are for all your support in all of those ways. And we do just so appreciate you being here to support good writing and spreading the word about the spoken word. And this remarkable cast is now going to attempt something we didn't even rehearse. But you're going to happen. We're going to do this together, right? We're going to do this. I'm going to step forward. You guys all step forward with me. Over here, right? We're going to take now. Over here. All right, ready?